Hi everyone. Today we're going to start talking a bit about some basic tools in the 3D modeling software Sketchup. Now, Sketchup is incredibly valuable for taking your ideas and essentially thinking in 3 dimensions, representing your ideas with some actual volumes. Now, in this video, we're going to be focusing on the paid version of Sketchup. That's Sketchup Pro. There are other alternatives to this, like Sketchup Free, which is the free web page version, but for now, we're going to focus on Sketchup Pro. So let's go ahead and jump into it. When you first jump into Sketchup Pro 2022, or whichever version you get, you're going to see a window that looks something like this. You can either pick a new template and create a new model from what you see up here. You can open a recent file right here, or you can go down and you can adjust your licensing down here. For now, we're just going to focus on picking a template and starting a new model. For demonstration right now, we'll go ahead and pick something in millimeters. The architectural designation you see above the unit of millimeters here won't make a great deal of difference to us at this stage, so we can go ahead and pick this one and jump right in. Left click to pick, and now we're in. So there's lots of tools that you're going to have at your disposal here in SketchUp. So first off, the file bar up at the top. This file bar up at the top of the page, that's where you're going to manage basically everything. So this is going to be where you can open and save your files, you can import and export as you need to, things like that. There's also other tabs here where you can access other pieces that are valuable for your camera projection, which will be particularly useful to us later, as well as further drawing styles and additional tools that will also be useful to us. Now, just below here is your toolbar section. So this is where you're going to have various different toolbars with different tools that you can use to do different things in 3D. Now, one thing to note about this is that if you right-click your open space right here, you're going to be able to add in additional tools that aren't in the initial toolbar that you might see when you open your initial file. Now, just to make sure that we're armed with all the tools we need for right now, we're going to add in a tool to our toolbar. We'll do this by moving up to the empty space and right-clicking. We're going to move down to Large Tool Set and left-click. This is going to give us a whole bunch more tools that are going to be really handy for us as we move forward with this. Now, on the right side of your page here, this will differ a little bit for Mac users versus PC users. So for PC users, you're going to have something called a tray over here. It's basically a stacked window on the right-hand side where you can minimize and maximize in order to see different things inside of your model. So this is where you can do things like manage your materials. You can go to your drop-down here. You'll be able to adjust materials you want in the project. You can manage things like shadows, scenes, and whatever else you wish. Now, if by some chance you're starting SketchUp and you're not able to see any of this, here's how you get to your default tray. You're going to move up and over to the window drop-down, left click, move over to default tray. It might say something more like show tray, in which case you would just left click it and your tray would appear. And in a similar fashion, you can go to window, default tray, and hide it just as easily if you should ever want to. Now, for those of you who are in the class who are Mac users, these are all going to be called windows instead, and they might appear a little bit differently for you. They might be like floating around your page a bit more, in which case you can left click and drag your window or your tray or whatever you might have very easily. Just left click and hold to drag to either side of the page that you wish to orient this on. So now seems like a good time for us to get to know our screen a little bit better here. Have a look down at the bottom left corner here. You've got your status bar. This will tell you information about whatever tool you currently have shown. If you look a little further over to the bottom right, you have your measurement status bar. Now you'll notice you can't really click into or interact too much with either of these things. That's because they're only intended to reflect the status of whatever tool that you're using. And finally, we have our workspace. That's this big window in the middle right here. We're going to be able to navigate around and manipulate this model that we're going to be developing and view it entirely through our workspace window in the middle of the page here. Now let's get into using some tools to actually navigate around this model so we can get our bearings. So this here is a 3D space. As you can see, it's got an X, a Y, and a Z axis. Now, just like we discussed in AutoCAD, Illustrator, and InDesign tutorials, it is really valuable to have a 3-button mouse when you're using SketchUp. So you have that middle scroll wheel, and I'll show you why in just a second. Now, if you want to navigate around your model very simply, you can just move over to the toolbar over here, left click the orbit tool, left click it, bring it into your model space, and then left click and hold to orbit around your model, just like this. Now, if you move over to the hand tool right over here, you can left click that to pick pan, and then by left clicking and holding, you can pan across your view as you need to. If you're interested in focusing on something in particular, you can move over to your toolbar once more, left click the magnifying glass for zoom, left click and hold, dragging up or down will zoom in and out respectively. Now, picking out all of those icons for your commands is a little bit laborious. So here's where that 3-button mouse of ours is really useful. Zoom can be done with your 3-button mouse by using your middle scroll wheel and rolling it forward and backward to zoom in and out. Now you'll notice that it will zoom in based on wherever you're pointing your cursor. So if there's a particular area you want to focus on, make sure you move your cursor to that area and you can scroll in or out accordingly. If you're interested in orbiting, you're going to hold down your middle scroll wheel, and with it held down, you can move your cursor around your drawing to orbit as you want to without having to pick anything from the toolbar. If you're interested in panning, you can do this as well using just the middle scroll wheel and keys on the keyboard by holding the middle scroll wheel down and then holding shift down as well. So you see the little hand appear, and now with both held down, you can move your cursor about to pan as you want to. So as you can see, just using your middle scroll wheel is way faster in terms of navigating your model than it would be if I was using the icons on my toolbar. Now we can start talking about some of the tools that we can actually use to draw stuff inside of SketchUp. So basically, the way you draw things in SketchUp is by activating a tool. Like, for example, let's say we want to draw a line. We're going to move over to the toolbar. We're going to pick the line tool. We're going to left click, and now you can see our cursor's changed. It's now reflecting the line icon. So that tool is active. We could move over to any spot in our model space. We could left click, and then we'll have an active line where we'll only have to left click again to specify a next point. And to escape it, we can just hit escape to be done drawing that line. Now, it is really worth noting at this stage of your learning with SketchUp that it is really valuable to also know keyboard shortcuts. So instead of having to pick the line tool from the toolbar, you can tap L on your keyboard, and as you can see, that also takes you to the line command, and you can begin drawing a line from that. Now, if you have a look in the description of this video, I have a list of a handful of really good keyboard shortcuts for tools that are going to be useful to you here in SketchUp. Now, remember how I just mentioned the status bar down here? This indicates what the tools that we're currently using are doing. We're going to go ahead and check that out right now. Let's tap the L key or select the line command manually. Tap the left click to begin drawing our line. Now you'll notice that it is going to tell us down here, click to set second endpoint or enter length. So if we wish, we can move our cursor as we want to, and then we can left click, tap once again to specify the second point in our line. Alternatively, instead of left clicking and then left clicking again and eyeballing it, we can also begin a line and then input the length of that line manually. I'll show you what I mean. If I start a line by single clicking, I can now move my line in any direction that I want to. Let's say I want to forge a line that's parallel to the green axis, and I want it to be 7,000 millimeters long, because again, we're working in millimeters. If I want to do this, all I have to do is specify the direction of where I want that second point to go, and then I specify the length that I want that line to be. So I'll type 7000 for 7,000 millimeters and hit enter. And just like that, that'll produce that line that is 7,000 millimeters in length. Now that we've specified the direction of this line, we can move our cursor over to the toolbar and we can pick the dimension tool. Let's go ahead and pick the dimension tool, bring our cursor over to the line that we want to dimension, left click, and as you can see, that will produce a dimension based on the beginning and end point of that line. Left click, and now we see that this line we've produced is 7,000. Now let's go ahead and select our line tool again, and we're going to draw two lines here, one after the other, at right angles to one another. Now let's move over to the select command on the toolbar. Now if we select this line or this line, watch what happens over in the entity info portion of our default tray. As you can see, it specifies different pieces of information for these two different lines. Now watch what happens if we take the line tool again and we draw a line that essentially closes this shape right here between these 2 points. Let's left click this endpoint, tap left click, trace over to this endpoint, tap left click once again, and now we've defined this shape, and as a result, it's created a face inside of that shape. In SketchUp, the faces are essentially the surfaces that will define all of our volumes. You can add textures and materials to a face in SketchUp, and a series of different faces, all sharing similar edges, will be what essentially form all of your volumes. So take a look at this shape right here. Watch what happens if I delete the edge that defines that face. Let's left click this line here, we'll delete. And as you can see, that face has gone away because it needs that line to define its boundary. But if I want to bring that face back, I can do so very easily. I'll activate the line command. I will left click and move to the other endpoint and tap left click once again. And now that shape has been defined and the face inside of it has reappeared. Now in SketchUp, if there is an entity that you'd like to get rid of, there's a few different ways to do this. Let's say I want to get rid of these 3 sides right here on this shape, and I only want this side here to be left. Here's how this can be done. I can hold down the shift key, and with the select tool selected, hold down shift, left click, tap left click, and tap left click to select those 3 edges that we want to get rid of. Then I can tap delete on the keyboard, and we've gotten rid of them. Alternatively, you can also get rid of faces and edges by using the erase tool. That's right over here in the toolbar. To use it, I just move over, I select the erase tool, left click, and you'll notice if I left click, that will essentially delete any edge line that we don't want in our model anymore. Now, let me show you something really useful that SketchUp offers that allows us to essentially draw planar faces really easily. Let's go ahead and start drawing a line here. You can left click pretty much anywhere. Tap left click. Now notice this. You'll notice that as I move my cursor around, it wants to automatically snap to either the green, the red, or the blue axes. This is called axis inferring in SketchUp. The idea is that it's trying to help us draw geometrically sound 90-degree planar faces. Now let's say I'm interested in drawing in the green direction right here, and I want it to snap to that green axis. So here's how I extend that exact line as I see fit. Once it is snapped to that axis, I can hold shift down, and no matter where I move my cursor, it's going to maintain that trajectory of the line along that axis. If I release shift, look, it moves around, but once I'm snapped to the green axis, I hold shift down, and then I can move my cursor as much as I want, and it is still going to produce a line along that axis. Now, watch how you can also use axis inferencing to shift between these 3 axes of SketchUp very easily. Let's say I'm moving along the green axis, I'm holding shift down, so I'm automatically snapping to that axis, but I want to draw something along the blue or the red axis. Here's what I do. By keeping shift held down and with this direction specified, you can tap the arrow keys, the left and right or up and down arrow keys, to essentially shift through the different axes. Now, SketchUp also really always wants to help us be drawing along an axis, and I'll show you what I mean right now. Let's take this face right here, for example. I'll select the line tool and look to specify a first point. If I move over to this corner, look what it says. It specifies endpoint. That means that is the endpoint of both of these lines right here. If I move my cursor a little bit over, it specifies that this is the midpoint. So I know that if I started drawing a line here, I'd be drawing it off of the midpoint of the edge of this shape. Now, if I move my cursor anywhere else on this shape, it's going to specify that it is on face. This means that if we were to start drawing, it would be right on top of this face that we've got right here. It's kind of like your snaps in AutoCAD, where it's making sure we're drawing on plane and the lines we're producing aren't just floating in space. There are other tools in SketchUp. Tapping R allows you to access the rectangle tool. It's very much like drawing a rectangle in AutoCAD, where you left click, tap a certain point, and then you drag to specify the opposite corner of that rectangle, and then left click, tap once again to complete it. You can also craft circles by typing C on your keyboard or picking it over here on the toolbar if you want, but it never hurts to be getting good at your key commands. Tap C, left click, and then move your cursor to ultimately define the radius of that circle. Left click. Now, if you wish, you can create a 3D volume in SketchUp by drawing vertical faces and using inferences in SketchUp. Let me show you what I mean. Let's go ahead and copy this shape over. I'm going to left click and hold to select it, drag a box over it, and release. I can now type Control C and Control V to copy a new shape. Now that we've got a new shape over here, we can use axis inferencing and SketchUp's built-in snaps to essentially define some vertical shapes, some vertical elements to this mass. As you can see, it automatically wants to snap to the green axis here that's in line with this corner right here. So it wants us to produce a geometrically sound object. And as you can see, your axis inferencing is telling you that if you continue on the red line, you will produce a 90-degree angle with this other endpoint. So you're essentially able to draw your built form using lines and using axis inferencing. However, that is very time consuming, and there's a much faster and easier way to do this in SketchUp. So here's what we're going to do instead. We're going to select our push-pull tool, or tap P to access the push-pull tool. You're going to move over to the face that you want to extrude, and then tap left-click. And then as you move your cursor up or down, that's going to extrude that surface as much as you manually specify. Now, let's say that we don't want this just to be some random eyeballed height. Here's what we're going to do instead. Let's hit Control Z and undo that. We're going to use the push-pull tool. We're going to select that face, but instead of dragging it, we're going to go ahead and we're going to type how high we want this face to be extruded. Let's select the push-pull tool, left-click. We'll select the face we want to extrude, left-click. And now we're going to specify that we want this extrusion to be, say, 2000 millimeters. We're going to do this by just typing 2000 for 2000 and hitting enter. And as you can see, that completes a push-pull extrusion to that exact specification that we just asked it for. Now, push-pull doesn't just have to be used to add material. It can also be used to subtract it. Let me show you what I mean right now. Let's tap R for rectangle. Let's specify a first point of a rectangle, tap left click, and specify a second point of a rectangle, tap left click, to sort of create a bit of a wall type shape. So now that's defined a rectangle with a face inside. Let's grab our push pull tool, left click, select the face we want to extrude, left click, and drag so it's decently high. Now let's say we want to have a door cut out of this wall. This can be done very easily using the push-pull tool. So let's go ahead. We're going to grab our rectangle tool one more time, tap R, specify a point along this bottom edge here, left-click, tap, drag your sort of door shape up along this face. It's still going to be on the face, and we're going to left click again. As you can see, this has now divided this face into 2 faces. Perfect. That's exactly what we want. Now let's go ahead and jump over to our push-pull tool. Let's left click. We'll move over to the shape that we want to essentially subtract from this wall with. Let's tap left click. Now instead of dragging it out to have this sort of cantilevering mass, we're going to push it in. We're going to push it all the way to the back of the shape where it gives us that offset limited to command. That's essentially meaning that we're pushing this shape we've just cut out to the back of what we're cutting it out of. So if we left click once more in a second, that section has now been removed. And you can do this with any shape that you're able to draw on this flat planar face. Now let's say I want to draw a little radius out of one of these corners. You can tap A or move up to the arc command prompt up here to begin drawing an arc. Let's go ahead and specify the first point of that arc somewhere along this face here. As you can see, it's giving us the prompt for on edge. That's perfect. That's just what we want. Let's tap left click. And now it's asking us where we want the other point on that radius to be. And once again, we want it to be along this top face right here. So we'll tap left click once more. We want to specify a radius that is also on face. So as you can see, I get the prompt that says on face. Great. All this is exactly what we want. Let's left click once again. And now we've divided this into yet another separate face. Let's go ahead and use that push-pull tool once more. Left click, grab the face that we want to push, pull, and subtract with. Push to the back limit of the wall we're subtracting from, and left click. Now let me show you where things get kind of interesting here too. Let's say I have my push-pull selected and I try to go to push-pull this face, and it's giving me that little no sign. And there's a reason why. That's because SketchUp can only use the push-pull tool on planar surfaces. There are some additional plugins you can get into that could push-pull a curved surface like this, but that's kind of outside of the scope of what we're talking about right now. If you stay largely working with planar surfaces and using your push-pull tool in that context, you'll be far more successful with this.